So how to prepare for a telephone interview. Like anything else, you need to do your research, on the company, the industry, on the job. You need to have a look at their website, read relevant journals, and try to do this in advance. And I think when you're on the telephone, because the person on the other end of the line can't see you, it's tempting to think, you can kind of be looking at the paper, be looking at different websites, be going through your notes. Have you ever noticed when you're talking to somebody on the telephone and they're distracted, or they're on the computer, or they're not listening to you? It's very, very obvious. So make sure you do your research in advance. So you know the company, know the organisation, know the job. Know what skills and have examples. Know what skills you have and have examples ready to give them, because a lot of the questions that you will be asked over the telephone will be the same as you'd be asked at a face-to-face interview, but you need to be prepared again. What do you have to offer? If somebody's ringing you, if you have a telephone interview, they're obviously interested. Sometimes it's used as a first interview, as a screening interview. In this current environment, it may be the first, second, or third interview. So again, you need to be prepared and you need to know what you have to offer. I suppose the main thing as well is to practice. So family, friends, if you know somebody who can kind of call you, ask you some interview questions, and you can respond with the answers you've prepared. Even though you've prepared the answers, it's a conversation. So you need to think of it as a conversation between two adults. It needs to try and flow as naturally as possible, but you still need to do the preparation in advance. So if you can do a practice telephone call beforehand and get your friend or family member to give you some feedback. Could they understand what you said? Did you speak clearly? Did you pause? Did you ask questions? Did you ask for clarification? So again, it's good to get some feedback. We're not used to getting feedback on our speaking voices usually, so it could be a new experience. So try to get some practice in first of all. Okay, so how to kind of prepare yourself for the questions. So you're probably going to get a lot of the same questions that you would get in a normal face-to-face interview. I suppose the thing to remember though is, when you're answering the phone, hopefully they've given you a pre-arranged time and they're not, catching you on the hop. Don't get caught off guard when the phone rings. So you need to be professional. Good morning, good afternoon, hello, as opposed to hiya. So you need to keep it a little bit formal. Remember, it's a professional conversation with a purpose. So try not to use too much informal language throughout the telephone conversation either, and maintain a professional tone of voice. Be aware of the pace of your voice. Obviously, speaking on the phone because you're not getting the visual cues. You're not seeing when somebody's nodding. You're not seeing when they're getting ready to ask another question. So you need to slow your pace down. And you need to give yourself time to answer. You also need to give the other person time as well. So try and be succinct and to the point. Try and get your enthusiasm across. I think sometimes, do you ever listen to the radio and you can hear, I listen to Drive Time a lot when I'm driving home in the evening, and you can really hear when the presenter somebody's told them a joke or when they're laughing. So you can get a lot of emotion across through your voice, and it's very easy to hear when somebody's being enthusiastic or not. So again, be aware that a lot of emotions can come across in your voice, but you need to be succinct and to the point. It can be hard for the interviewer to know how you're doing as well. So if you're not sure if you've said enough, it's okay to say, look, would you like me to add anything else? Is that okay? So it's okay to check in with them to find out, do they want to hear anything else? It's better to be too short and maybe too concise than be too long and rambling. So make sure to check in with the person that you're talking to see if they've kind of heard what they want to hear. Suppose if they're talking to you, just to make sure that you tell them that you're listening. Things like, okay, yeah, I understand, to let them know you're listening. Try not to interrupt them when they're talking. Okay, so some very, very practical tips for telephone interviews. Obviously, you need to try and find a quiet room. You see this all the time about dressing to impress. You could be in your pajamas, I suppose. You could be lying on your bed. But I suppose if this is a formal interview, it might help you, to kind of psychologically get into the role. I suppose it is a performance. So you need to kind of psychologically psych yourself up, get dressed in some shape or form. It puts you in a professional frame of mind. My old boss, the head of careers, Mary Sweeney, used to say, you can always tell when somebody's standing up. So obviously, if you can't stand up, that's fine. You need to sit down, sit up straight, keep your shoulders straight so your lungs are kind of getting as much air as possible. But I suppose your posture, how you're sitting, how you're standing is important as well. Definitely not lying down. Smile, as I said, it's kind of easy. I don't know if you can hear me smiling now, but I am. But it's easy. It's easy enough to hear somebody's kind of tone of voice or what they're doing coming across the phone as well. So remember to smile when you're talking on the phone. You want the person who's listening to you to think, yeah, they sound interesting, they sound enthusiastic, they sound like they want to be here, and they sound professional. If you've got notes, if you have notes, brilliant. But I suppose, just because the person can't see you doesn't mean they can't hear you. So you need to be prepared. But if you've got sheafs of notes and you're rattling through them, can you hear this? I've got a lot of notes here now. You have pages and pages of notes. You should have all that prepared beforehand. If you need a couple of notes, make a couple of bullet points, that should do. But no sheafing or shuffling through sheets of paper. No harm to have a glass of water in case you get a dry throat. If you're not sure what the person on the other side of the phone has asked you, don't be afraid to ask them to repeat the question or for clarification. And it's okay to take some notes as well. But again, it's hard to listen and take notes at the same time. So the main thing you're doing in this telephone conversation is listening, breathing, thinking, and giving thoughtful answers. So some common interview questions that could come up in any interview. So you need really to be prepared to answer any of these. Can you tell me a bit about yourself? That's usually kind of the question at the very beginning. It's just a couple of minutes to kind of get you warmed up. But again, you need to have an answer to that. So something about what you're studying, why you've applied for this job, keep it simple and keep it to the point and keep it short more than anything. Why did you choose your degree or your master's degree? Why did you apply to us? So again, you've done your research on the company. What do you know about us? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Can you give me an example of a time? Sorry, spelling mistake there. Can you give me an example of a time when you had to A, cope with a difficult situation, meet with a strict deadline, work in a team? So they're competency-based questions. I'll be looking at them again in a second. One of the kind of the more recent types of questions, it's a strengths-based question. Sometimes interviewers like to ask you, what is your greatest achievement? That's quite a tricky one, especially if you don't think you have many achievements. But it's something that's important to you. It shows self-reflection. So that's a question that you do need to prepare an answer to, and you need to be able to answer why. It doesn't have to be major, but it's something that's important to you. And why is it important to you? At the end, they'll probably ask you, do you have any questions? We'll have a look at that now in a minute. So competency-based questions, they're very, very common. So they usually ask you to describe a time when you displayed or demonstrated a certain skill or a situation you found yourself in. What did you do? The reasoning behind it is that past behaviour is a predictor of future performance. So lots and lots of graduate employers, public sector companies, including UL, the HSE, they tend to ask competency-based questions. So some examples could be, can you give me an example of when you've used your communication skills to influence other people's behaviour? Can you describe a situation when you worked in a team? Can you describe how you analysed? When have you had to deal with? So for each of these questions, you're being asked to tell a story. So how do you tell a story? We would recommend that you use the STAR method. So the S stands for the situation or the task. So this is kind of the introduction or opening. You're describing the event. So it's about bringing the event to life. Remember, this is a story. So you're kind of setting the scene. It's like painting a picture. It's the overall picture. So you're setting the scene in the S and the T. A lot of people, one mistake that people make though is they tend to spend way too much time on the S part of the STAR model. So setting the scene, painting the picture, that's all very well. But the most important part of this structure is the A. So you set the scene, and then what was the action that you took? This is what you did. This is the body of the story. These are the actions that you took. And I think a big mistake that people make here as well is they talk about we. In the career service, we see this all the time. I think it's just, I don't know, it seems to be commonplace. When somebody's kind of answering a competency-based interview question, they talk about we, especially if it's a teamwork question. You can use we when you're setting the scene. We had to do a presentation, we had to kind of complete a project and present it to our classmates. But when you come to the A part, the action part, you have to talk about what I did. So anytime we do a mock interview with somebody and they're preparing for a competency-based interview, the feedback that we tend to give is you need to use the I word more often. What did you do? What was your role here? So make sure when you're preparing answers to competency-based questions, it's what did I do? This is what I did. What did you do? Okay, so keep that in mind. The R then is the results. This is the outcome of the situation. So again, what was the result of the situation? Was it a success? Was it a failure? Why? Would you have done things differently? So if you can use the STAR model, that will really, really help you to structure your conversations. And I think it's easy when you use the STAR model sometimes to rehearse the answers. That's absolutely not what you should be doing. This is just a structure to formalize your answers. So if you practice enough and if it becomes familiar enough, you'll be able to use this model so it sounds like and it feels like just a natural conversation. But you still need to use the situation, the task. What was the action that I took and what was the result? So it takes practice to do that so it sounds natural. Okay, so how do you follow up on a telephone interview? So the telephone interview is over. Hopefully you've been able to answer all your questions. You've been able to understand everything. The interviewer has been able to understand you. You've spoken clearly, concisely. At the end of the interview, they'll probably ask you if you do have any questions. You could just ask them, what's the next stage of the process? Anything else that might have come up in the interview that you want to find out more about the role is fine as well. I suppose the main thing that we would always say is, you don't ask about the money and you don't ask about holidays, not at this stage. You can talk about those later. You can also ask when you would expect to hear from them. If you don't hear back, it's perfectly acceptable to follow up as well. I know quite a lot of graduate recruiters at the moment, some of them don't actually know what's happening. So if you've had an interview and you haven't heard back, whether it was a face-to-face interview or a telephone interview, it's okay to follow up with the person that you were talking to just to get some clarification. If you weren't successful, it's a chance to ask for some feedback. Hopefully they'll be able to give you some feedback on how you did. If you thought that you did really well and you didn't proceed to the next round, I suppose then it's good to get some feedback on why they didn't think you did well. So if you can get some feedback, do get some feedback. Also, we can give you feedback as well in the career service. So if you've never had a telephone interview before, if you've had telephone interviews and you're not getting anywhere with them, we would be happy to do a practice interview with you. None of us are using work telephones from home. So if you do want to do a practice telephone interview, we would probably do it through Microsoft Teams, but just turn the cameras off. So I can't see you, you can't see me. So I can just hear your voice and you can just hear me. But if you would like to have a practice and get some feedback, we'll be very, very happy to do that for you.